talk a bit about how you envision the relationship between Rhodey and Stark, and by contrast, or by the same speech, I guess, your own relationship with Robert Downey Jr. throughout the movie.
Well, you know, I think you see more in this one than in the other one, the dynamic between them. You know, Tony is always trying to get Rhodey to let down his hair, so to speak, or get out of his shell. And I think clearly Rhodey is the anchoring or grounding element for Tony in his life, you know, trying to keep him a little bit tethered. You know, Tony is fond of telling the world, bring it, and then the world brings it and gets him in danger and all of his friends. So, you know, Rhodey is much more sober and level-headed, and there's a chain of command that he has to follow. But as I said, it's fun when they're both out there just having to figure it out outside of the suits. And you kind of see who they are for one another, you know, that there's points where he has to follow Rhodey, and, you know, there's points where Rhodey has to follow him, and that sort of interplay between both of them was a lot of fun to play. And Robert and I, you know, it's nice to bring elements of our relationship into the relationship that the characters share as well. You know, we've stayed friends over the years, and, you know, both are fathers and have a lot of ways that we connect outside of what we're doing in the film. So it's nice to have someone that you have mutual respect with, and both a desire to open the playing field, so to speak, and let all the ideas in. Well, I think his, you know, sort of ear toward the buddy cop movie definitely comes into play with the relationship between Tony and Rhodey, and his focus on irreverence and comedy in the face of, you know, insurmounting odds is something that's really feels like Shane's kind of a trademark, and that's something that this film had, which I think made it a lot of fun, which is that we're, you know, dealing with real character beats and a lot of humor, but at the same time it's against this backdrop of this huge spectacle. So I think everyone knew we had to kind of step it up and just, you know, pay off the promise that I think the first two films sort of made, and I think that this is the culmination of all of that. Well, you know, Kevin Feige and I and Robert all, after the second one, you know, stayed in touch through over the next year and a half, 2 years, I guess, almost, while they were doing Avengers, and just talked about how if we were going to do this again, how we needed to do it, you know, bigger and better than the last time, if we were able to, not so much in size and scope and spectacle, but more in these characters' relationships had to be deeper, and we had to try to gain a greater understanding for why Tony and Rhodey were who they were, and why they were both friends, and what they bring to each other. So it was nice to have the ability in this one to even get out of the suits and do a lot more of that action in that third act set piece, which is always a lot of fun. Got to work with the stunt team, and got to have this sort of wish fulfillment, you know, satisfied. It feels like they kind of went back to back. They did go back to back last year, you know. I wrapped Iron Man 3, and then literally a week and a half later I was on the set for House of Lies, and came right out of the end of House of Lies and started the press for this movie. So it's been running back to back to back. I don't know when wheels are up on the Avengers 2. I don't know if you know, Iron Patriot or War Machine's going to make an appearance, or Rhodey in any iteration of this character makes an appearance. I don't know yet. And we have to go back to work on the show, or the writers go back next month. So we're starting up again pretty quickly. In August, we're going on the stages. So yeah, there's not a lot of time. I think next year, unless there's another reboot of an Iron Man or an Avengers or a War Machine, I don't know, I may be back doing it again. But I still look at other things because I like to believe that I have the opportunity to do something other than just these two things. I always wanted to be like Wolverine. No, no, I guess my young, for me, when I got into comic books, I was 17, 18 years old. You know, I hadn't really read them as a young kid. Archie and Veronica, I guess, were around. Richie Rich, those things were around. Archie was not my role model, nor was Jughead. But I got into the comic books really when I got to college, because I went to Cal Arts and a lot of my friends were animators, and they had all of these comic books around that I'd never seen and or heard of, and they weren't the down the line, you know, they were like Watchmen and stuff that was coming from the left, and Rands of Rocks, which wasn't even a comic book, was just a comic, was a character, and heavy metal, and I was like, these are crazy story, and yeah, really sophisticated kind of adult stuff. Swamp Thing, which I always just thought was some ridiculous, you know, movie, weird character, and then I read the stories, and that's what really caught me in the comics, was more the writing was really interesting, and the stories were really, you know, there was one that I read about, a Swamp Thing that I read that was about a serial killer, that he was dealing with a serial killer, and I was like, I didn't know that these comic books dealt with subject matter like this. So that's kind of when I got into it, right at the nexus of my adulthood were these comic books. So at that point I was really trying to create a me that I was looking up to, but I liked having these characters to come back to late at night in the dorm room and just pour over them. It was really great. Yeah, and especially because it really felt like the second movie, it felt like, you know, is it a sequel to the Avengers, or is it the third, you know, Iron Man? It's kind of both, because we are in the same, as far as the Marvel universe goes, we're all breathing the same air. So, you know, Tony's kind of PTSD that he has as a result of what he went through in the Avengers became a part of this storyline. And our awareness that, you know, the sky opened up and aliens poured out is why the president goes, no, I want a dude standing right next to me who's my superhero. So we tip our hat to it with the full knowledge that that's what the world is. But yeah, we had to make it its own, you know, contained piece in and of itself, and not, and in a way sort of assume that people kind of already knew the mythology coming into it. And if they didn't, that they'd still enjoy it for what it was, and have a good time, and understand that something had been established and figure it out. I mean, there's so many ways to get information now that we weren't able to get at all when I was a kid, that you can go online and in 5 minutes figure out where you have to be when this movie starts. So it's a brave new world in that aspect. But yeah, I think focusing on just telling this story was what allowed it to, I think, achieve what it ultimately did, which is a really entertaining and interesting piece. I'm hearing everything. I'm hearing people telling me that they heard there would be, Robert saying he's not coming back, Robert saying he might come back. I mean, I don't think anyone knows. It's a lot of it's predicated on how this one performs and how it's received, and it seems like it's tracking insanely. That can always change the, you know, calculation of people and what they want to do and how they want to do it. But really, it's about being able to find a new way in, something that just doesn't look like a cynical, you know, another time to the well, another time to the ATM, you know, that kind of stuff. There's no reason to go back if that's what it is. So we have to find a way to have a fresh approach to these. It's funny because the comic books were never at a lag. You know, you have 7 million sequels in a comic book, but a movie's a little different. So keeping in mind what Marvel's doing with their other family of movies as well, Captain America and Thor, and, you know, the Hulk eventually will probably have another spin. It's figuring out ways to tell the story that's fresh and innovative and interesting. But if they can do all that, who are we kidding? Of course they're going to try to do it again. Of course. Both of them were tough. Yeah. I'm not going to lie. One is, you know, spandex and, you know, dotted bands and squares, and the other one was just a cowboy. But Don Cheadle never envisioned himself in either of those get-ups. So, yeah, both of them take a minute. Yeah.
This may be a no-brainer, but I'm curious, you know, if there is no more Iron Man, but they're like, hey, War Machine movie, are you down for a War Machine movie?
If I can play him as Marty, probably I would do it. No, I mean, you know, because they'll probably be shooting at the same exact time. Yeah, of course, I would be, again, it would have to be something that would be warranted. It would need to be needed. If it just feels like it's something that's, well, let's just try and capitalize on this heat while it's going. That's a prescription for failure. And I think we want to, especially for comic book fans, and there needs to be a veracity that they can get behind, and there needs to be a storyline that hasn't already been mined. I'd like to see Rhodes, you know, kind of untethered. I wonder what he would be like out of uniform, so to speak. You know, what if his moral compass, you know, had him answering the call to something that wasn't politically correct and or sanctioned by the government, but he does it anyway because that's what his moral center tells him that he needs to do, and now he's out there. You know, he's no longer a colonel. He's been discharged. I mean, I don't know. I've got fantasies about where it could go. And we've got, obviously, the canon of comic books to refer to as well. I mean, in the comic books, he takes over Iron Man's mantle at some point. So they'll figure it out or they won't figure it out. But it would be great to come back and do this again if there was a real engine behind it that made sense, yeah. Well, I think it speaks to Sir Ben and his, you know, desire to continue to expand and flex different muscles and increase his, you know, his joy for it. I mean, we still get into this because we want to be excited every day and do something new. At some point, you don't want to just keep playing Gandhi over and over again. You know, he doesn't. That's not interesting to him. He's the dude in Sexy Beast. You know, he was also in The Dictator. You know what I mean? He's in Sasha's movie. He's in that. He's been everywhere. He's done everything, and I think it's because he wants to keep it fresh and interesting to himself. And he's great in this movie. Oh, it was like fist fights every day. Yeah. And they're trying to choose up sides, you know, who's with me? Mutiny on the Bounty. No, I actually never saw John on the set.
Yeah, I guess you didn't have.
Yeah, we didn't have any scenes together. But Shane talks often about, and I know he did, kept John, you know, very close to him because, you know, it's help is help. Yeah. And he, you know, John had done this dance, and Shane wanted to know, how do I do this dance and not trip over my feet? You know, he's clearly has an identity as a writer and comes in from that side, but this thing is a juggernaut. I mean, at some point we're all wrapping our arms around each other, and it's us against this movie. And none of us know once we wrap the film what it's going to actually be, and did we actually do it? And you know, we show up to ADR and see these scenes cut together, and you know, the special effects department finally draws in what you've just been looking at as green screen the whole time. You go, oh, that's what I was reacting to. You know, that's what that moment is about. So it's a great, you know, it's a big piece of, it's a huge magic trick to us. And Shane was smart to have John in his corner.